Hey guys, it's Lisa and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to work on some more scrap wood projects, and I needed to get some more of these out in the store because most of them have sold, and this will be the last batch that I'll make because it's getting a little bit close. Some of these I had previously painted, but I wanted to keep them all very neutral because the decoupage that I'm going to be putting on this will show up much better if it has a white background. So I'm just painting the background of all of these white, and I am letting some show through just to add some dimension in the color. But other than that, I'm going to be just kind of putting white on each of these. Anytime that you're decoupaging with a napkin, most napkins do better if they have a white background. Everything just shows up much better. Now, on a few of these, I decoupaged some book pages, and this is one of them. And so I'm going to use this napkin here, but it's kind of a more plain napkin. So all I'm going to do is tear out the little bunny and tear out the little butterfly on the top. And that's why I wanted to use this book background, so it would add some interest to this. But because I don't want you to be able to see through this little bunny, I just decided to use a plain book page and put on the back of these. Actually, just put it on the back of the bunny, and the butterfly didn't mind if it had somewhat of a translucent look to it. So I just tore this out, the shape of the bunny, and then decoupaged that on. And I didn't worry with cutting it out perfectly. I just kind of tore around it, and then I'll glue that on here, and then I'll add the butterfly to the top. And I don't know how I missed that here, but I also tore out some flowers from another napkin and kind of placed those around the bunny. So that's a way to take a more plain napkin and make a better board with it. And I talked about in my hang tag video that when you're going through books, also not only do you need to look for pictures, but sometimes when there's a word that you can tear out that is one that you might use, then that always helps too. And in this case, my sister tore this one out, and this is the word bunny, so it worked perfectly to add to this little sign. And that particular napkin with that bunny was gifted to me, so I've not been able to find that one. These napkins, however, I did order these from Amazon, and they're a little plain, but I really wanted the lamb because it's just so hard to find anything faith-related. And so with this one, to keep it from being so plain, I'm going to add to it also, just like I did with the bunny. And if I didn't mention, I'm decoupaging with only that front layer of a napkin, the very top layer that has the image on it. So again, I'll do the same thing on this one. I'm going to decoupage this lamb on here, and then I'll add some flowers from another napkin just to add some color to this one. And I'm going to add the flowers to both the top and the bottom of this one. And if I didn't mention it, you can use Mod Podge here, but I'm just using Elmer's glue, just the regular school glue with just a touch of water added to it. You don't want to add much, but adding a little bit just helps it to go on smoother. Now, I didn't mention that each of these, once they're dry, I'll take outside and I'll use my orbital sander and just really smooth those edges, and that will clean up the decoupage edge, but it'll also kind of round out the edges on this and just gives it a lot better look. Now at Christmas time, I do ornaments with these, and so anytime that you can get free wood, and you don't want it to be in your way so much, just go ahead and cut it into small pieces, and you'll have it for projects like this, and you could stack them where they won't be in the way that way. And if you don't have any way of getting the wood or even cutting it, then I've also done this on the little canvas panels at the Dollar Tree that are about this size. These could even have holes drilled in them and a hanger added to them, and you could just hang them on a cabinet door or just wherever. They don't have to be just little shelf sitters or tiered tray pieces. I think this size is really good for tiered trays though. And this one has enough detail that that's all it's going to need. So I just decoupage that on and clean up those edges with the sander when it dries. And the same goes for the next one. The napkin had enough on its own. So again, I just decoupaged that on the front and cleaned up the edges. And I know that some of you will ask how much I get for these. These very small ones, I get $3. And they sell really well. And that may not seem like much, but most of my wood I get free. And even if I had to pay for this, you take one piece of beadboard and you can get so many of these out of it. And all that I'm doing is just decoupaging a napkin on it. So I really can't justify asking any more for these. Now this one I'm using a napkin on, and I'm also going to be using some pictures that I'll add to it that I've torn from magazines. And I just wanted to give this one a little bit different look. So I'm just kind of layering this one on with just whatever I find that I feel like will go with it. And I'll just keep adding until I like the look. And I'm using actually a combination of both napkins and clip art from book pages here. And again, all this that is kind of hanging off the sides, that's not an issue because I'm going to sand that off. And then for this next one, I found a larger piece of wood that would fit this stencil that I have, and I'm just going to kind of build this one off this stencil. And so I used my black ink on part of this, and then I used a gold ink on the other part. And the gold ink that I used wasn't the stays on, but I'm not worried about that because I'm going to finish these off with a clear coat anyway. So after I did the stencil, I just kind of went over that He Has Risen part. I just kind of outlined that a little bit to make it stand out better. And then I used my olive green ink pad and just made a little heel there. And I didn't want full coverage on that. And then I took my antiquing ink and I'm just kind of going around the edges, especially in the corners, just to give this a better look. I've already sanded this one at this point, but I just wanted to give it more of an antique look around the edges. And this is not a permanent ink either, so the clear coat will help this. I will have to spray this one instead of brush it on, because if you try to brush on after you use this antiquing ink, it'll just smear it into your paint. Now, I did several of the smaller pieces of wood that I'm not going to be showing in this video. I'll just kind of show them at the end, and I think I did a wall pocket. I wasn't able to film a lot of these, but I'm just giving you some ideas. And on this one, I just used the size that I found, and I'm putting some music pages in the background of this one, so I just glued those on. And then I'll sand off those edges to neaten this, and then I'm gonna make this one, after I antique around the edges, I'm gonna make this one a cross, and I'm gonna do that by using some lace ribbon to make the cross. Now, I wouldn't have had to do that because as it turns out, it didn't show up as well as I wanted it to. My plan was to do this lace cross and then put something down the middle of that lace and let the lace show around the edges. But the lace wasn't really going to show up around the edges that much. So I decided to do something else for the cross. So I kind of wasted this lace. I could have just drawn a cross, as it turns out. I could have just drawn a cross on there and then did this. Now, I was given these flowers by a very sweet friend that mailed them to me, and I wanted to put just a little bunch of these in the center of the cross. Again, this is something that I should have waited on because I end up having to take a couple of them off when I add what I'm going to make the cross from. So this one was a lot of trial and error. So a very sweet friend also brought me these little, I guess they are river birch logs. So I just cut them down the middle and made 2 out of the one, and I'm going to make my cross with these. This is where I had to remove some of my flowers on the sides to add those pieces to the side. So once my little wood is on there, my little wood pieces are on there, then I'm going to replace the flowers that I had to take off earlier. And then I'm happy with the cross, but I wanted to add something to give it a little more spiritual meaning. So I decided to take that same stencil that I used on the last wood piece and make a little tag for this. And because I know much of this won't fit, I'm just going to try to do what has the most meaning. So I'm just going to put "He is not here" on this little sign, and then or on this little tag rather. And then for the rest of it, I wanted to put that scripture passage on there. So I put the scripture passage on the bottom of the sign. So this will have have a better meaning to it, and it'll look more like Easter decor. But for this tag, I wanted to kind of layer it because I want this to show up well. So I'm just putting some other pieces behind it, and I'll just do this in kind of 3 layers. So I just put some darker paper behind the "He is not here," and then I'll put a lighter one behind that. But I'm using all rustic material here because I want this to be very rustic. So now I'm just going to punch a hole in that and tie it on with a little strip of fabric. And actually, I didn't tie it on. I just put a small strip of fabric on it and just kind of glued that to the center. I tried to tie it here, but there was just nowhere to tie it. So I ended up cutting that off and just kind of hot gluing it under that corner. And then again, I just put that little scripture passage down on the bottom of this board, and I just stenciled that straight on to the board. And I didn't put any kind of hanger on this. I just thought it could be used as a shelf sitter, or if someone wanted to hang it, they could always put a hanger on it. Now this one is a 2x6. So I had other plans for this one. I wanted to do some sort of a mosaic look. So I just took a picture from this Dollar Tree calendar that would fit on this well. And then I just cut it to fit and glued that straight on. And this image, I went ahead and glued it on because I need this as a pattern. So I glue that on, and then I make sure and glue it really well because I'm going to be gluing over the top of it as well. And I want to make sure that it lays down well. So I just glued it really well with some just clear school glue. I just made sure to put plenty on there and get it glued on really smooth. And then once I get this glued on, then again, this will be my pattern to do what I wanted to do with this. And I think I'm going to go ahead and stick with the colors that are in this bird. And the reason for that is it's going to be way easier for me to do this if I just use the colors that are already on there. The background will be completely different. But I do want these bird colors. So for the background of this, I want to use just old book pages, but I also want it to look like the sky behind it. So what I did was I just took some eyeshadow, and I know the eyeshadow is obviously not permanent at all, but once this is all done, I'm going to be clear coating it anyway, so this will work just fine. But what I did was I took some old book pages and I painted them with this eyeshadow in different shades of this blue. So I'll have some that are quite a bit lighter, some that are quite a bit darker, because I want to have some dimension in the sky. And then toward the bottom, I'm going to be using green. More green actually, so there'll be a little bit of blue in it, but then it kind of gradually change over to green. And then I'm going to tear all these straight edges off this, and then I'm just going to tear them into little bitty pieces. And I'll keep the green and the blue separate because I don't want to get them mixed in together. But I think with this, the smaller that you tear them, the better it looks. But obviously you don't want to go so small that it's too much work. So just whatever you're comfortable with doing. This is going to be kind of a messy job, I'll just warn you, because it's not so much that it's that messy, but you're going to get glue all over your fingers. And just kind of have to be careful that the pages don't stick to your fingers. But this is just the easiest way that I know to do it. I could use a brush, but for me it works better just to do it with my fingers. So what I want to do is I want to start with a light blue at the top. And I'm just going to color this whole background in with these little bits of paper. And again, I want to start light at the top and just gradually work it. Make it bluer or darker blue as I go down. And then eventually that blue will kind of fade into the green. So I want to start with my darker, bluer green first, and then work down to the greener green, if that makes sense. So it'll just kind of almost be like an ombre effect, except that I'm using both blue and green. Now, when you get to the bird, you want to just very carefully lay those pieces around it to just kind of outline your bird. You want to make sure here that you keep the shape of your bird. That's the most important thing, is that you keep that shape going. Now, I've never done one of these before. This is my very first one, and I just kind of thought today I might want to try this. And when I do it again, I will do it again because I do like it. But when I do it again, I will definitely start with that picture. That made it way, way easier for me. But what I will do differently, this is all where it's actually all wet here. That's why it looks darker. But what I will do differently is I'll probably use a lighter background so that it shows up more. So maybe I'll start with almost white and then work my way down to the very light blue, and then the same with the green. Because I think this would look better if it had more contrast. It actually does have contrast, but just not a whole lot. So here what I'm doing, this is not the book pages. This is just some magazine pages that I found a picture that had the colors that I want. And that's why using these same colors in the bird is really going to help, because all you're doing is repainting what's already painted. So you're just going to be looking for pictures that have these colors in them. Now, I don't recommend that you do solid anything, because I feel like I tried to do it with solid, and solid just didn't look right. So you want some pattern in your color, but not so much pattern that you lose your color, if that makes sense. So I was able to match these colors up pretty well, and again, the smaller that you go with these, the better. And I tried to keep the pattern that this color had in it was the grain was going in one certain direction, and I did try to keep that grain from going, the grain in the pattern going vertical, so that it looked more like feathers here. So the main thing that I would change is just that I would add more contrast to this. But I might also try one with even smaller pieces of paper. And I think what would be really pretty on this background is to cut out actual words, but of course that's very time consuming. But if you just cut out each individual line of the words and then cut those words out, I know that it would have a less natural look in the background, but I do think that might be a cool look also. And I think that a larger painting with this would turn out really well too. So I just kept adding these until I had the whole bird covered. And again, make sure that you keep that shape around the edges really carefully. But it really was much easier than I thought it would be. My biggest issue is because I did all this with my fingers instead of a brush, everything was just kind of trying to stick to my fingers. So obviously this little bird is going to need some feet. They weren't showing in the picture. So what I'm going to do is just paint a branch that it's going to be perched on in the bottom. And then my granddaughter Kaylee she helps me at the shop through the week, and she told me she was good at drawing feet, so I let her sketch out my feet around that little branch before I actually painted those on. And when I get to the head, then I just use some of this blue paper here. This was a sky and some mountains, but it looks pretty solid. If I could have found something less solid for the head, I would have. But it still worked out fine because there's not a whole lot of area there. I made sure to get some of the darker in these pieces and kind of work that into the head. And I even got some of the green branches, the darker green branches in this, and worked it kind of around the eyes. But I just covered the head just like these colors are here in the bird. And then once I got those covered, then I just took a little black circle from the magazine, and I tore out a circle, and that was a little bit tedious, but I didn't want it to be exactly round because I didn't want to take away from the natural look of this. So I just glued that on, and then once I got everything covered, then I went back with some paint, with some white paint, and just did some highlighting on this to make it stand out more, because again, I felt like this needed a little more contrast. So anytime that you need some contrast, just doing a lot of highlighting with white will help give you that contrast around the edges. And I will say that the body of this was very, very easy to do. The head maybe got a little more tedious. Some of the color blending was just a little bit harder for me, and I think mostly because I didn't have exactly the right blue pattern that I wanted. But I was still really happy with how this turned out for a first try. And on this one, just like all the others, I'm going to be sanding around those edges really well. And then I just took some dark brown paint here and added my branch. And then I took some of the white and highlighted around my bird and on the top of the branch. Now, I could have added a few leaves to this branch, but I didn't really feel like it needed it. Maybe it would have added some extra contrast if I had went with a lighter green. And if I have a hard time with this selling, then I may do that, just to kind of add a little something to it. Now, I will say that this is not one that you can really make any money on because it's a little time consuming. I did this one mostly because I just hadn't ever made one and was just curious and wanted to try it. So here I am highlighting around the bird and then highlighting the branch. And as you can see, it really starts to make that pop. And I put a little twinkle in the eye to make that eye stand out as well. Now, you don't want to get too heavy-handed with this highlighting. You want it to be a very thin line so that it looks more realistic. Now, this particular bird, you can't really see the wing, so I didn't worry about that. I'm just doing it just like the picture was. And then once I got all my highlighting in, then I just took some of my brown wax and I stained around the edges and on the back of this just to give those edges a better look because right now they're the color of the 2x4. And then here Kaylee is drawing in my feet. I'm very blessed that she is very good at drawing, so it gave me something to go by when I painted those on. So once she got these drawn in, then I just took my paint and I used a lighter brown for the feet, and then I highlighted those a little bit, and then this was finished. Again, I think I would have been much happier with this if I had used some more contrasting colors. But I would definitely try this again because I think that they're really pretty. And I might even try this with just unstained book pages in the back. But you'll see some boards here that I didn't do on film because, again, I just didn't have time to get it all filmed. But I did different ones of these. And I got my stock replenished, and I think this will be my last time making these for this season until next year. Again, these sell really well in my store, especially the very small ones for tiered trays and shelf sitters. They really sell well because all I'm doing is decoupaging a napkin on most of them, and so I can sell them for $3 and do really well. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great evening, and God bless you and your family.